Hey guys, it's Sarah. Welcome back to my channel and today's video, which is actually two ear tutorials in one. So if you guys are new to my channel, I do DIY Mickey ears quite often on my channel along with a ton of other content for you guys. But today's video is going to be focused on ears inspired by Muppets 3D, the show in Hollywood studios. So if you want to see how I made these two sets of ears, then just keep watching. We're going to start with the Fozzy bear inspired Mickey ears. So I started with this kind of teddy bear like material. This is from Joann's and I only bought 6 inches of it, and it's got like a nice fuzzy quality to it. I'm going to be tracing my ear cutting line template on these four times, and I'm going to cut all 4 of those out using a rotary blade, but you can also use fabric scissors if that is what you have on hand. If this is the first ear tutorial you guys are catching from me, then I actually do provide these templates for you guys. I have a couple different ones that I have linked down below in the description box, and they're linked in every single video, just in case you guys need them. So feel free to print those off and make yourself your own set of ears. The next template we're going to be using is the smallest, which is the foam and batting template, and we're going to be tracing 4 of these onto a piece of cardboard. I am only going to show 3 just because I want this video to not be a million years long, but I'm going to cut all 3 of these out, and then also a 4th one using an X-Acto knife on top of a cutting mat. If you guys are in need of supplies, Dollar Tree is a great place to check. They do have these cutting mats just in a very small version, but definitely big enough for making a set of ears, and they also sell cutting knives. The next step we're going to do is attaching that fabric to the cardboard. Now, normally I do add a layer of felt between these two, but because this fabric is so incredibly thick and fuzzy, it doesn't need it. So I am just going to be doing hot glue around the perimeter of the cardboard ear and then folding over the edges of my fabric and tapping it down into the glue. I like to work my way from the top down the sides and then do the bottom last. I find that this gives me a nice unwrinkled or puckered bottom, and then I also usually cut down the center of that bottom piece so that I can fold it over one flap at a time. Again, this will help limit any type of wrinkles or puckering in your fabric that makes it look a little messier. And that is 1/2 of an ear, so you'll repeat that step and create 4 halves of ears. Then for one side of the ears, it's just going to be kind of plain, so I'm going to be gluing 2 halves together. I added a pretty good amount of hot glue, but not so much that it would ooze out of the edges because you don't want to make a big hot glue mess. And then I'm just firmly pressing down. You guys can see it's like I'm performing CPR. Firmly pressing down onto this ear and allowing that glue to fully set and dry, so that I have a really nice adherence. And then we're going to move on to the other ear, which is going to incorporate this ribbon, which is pink with white polka dots. I wish I had had a white with pink polka dots, but this is so close and it works. But anyway, I'm going to be cutting off a strip of that, and initially I tried tying this around the ear that I had just made, but I really didn't like how it looked looped around the ear like that, so I used that ear to create the bow size and shape that I wanted, but I did decide to attach it a different way. So taking one of those halves, I'm going to actually glue this ribbon on the inside of one of those ears, just like this. So just tacking it down with some hot glue and just pressing it down. Make sure you don't burn yourself here. I was not paying attention and I definitely did. And then going on the edges of the ear, I will drape over that ribbon and tap it down into the hot glue just a little bit at a time. So you don't want to use too much hot glue because it will be very difficult to keep control, if that makes sense. And then we're going to attach the other half on this side. So we've now got the ribbon poking out on one side of the ear, so we're attaching the back of the ear. Once the glue had fully dried, then I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to tie the little bow tie the way that I like it. His bow tie kind of like is droopy and it hangs down, so I messed with it a couple of times to get the right kind of draping that I wanted. This ribbon was also very, very stiff, which made it a little bit harder to work with. So if you guys are buying new supplies for this, maybe look for like a little bit more of a gentle ribbon, like something that doesn't feel so stiff. And then I wanted it to make sure this stayed in place, so I did do a little dot of hot glue at the center of the bow and just tacked that down. And then to make sure that these little pieces, I don't know what to call them, like the tails of the bow, hung down correctly, I glued those in place as well. Next, we're going to move on to making the little hat for Fozzie Bear. So I just took this red Solo cup and I cut off the bottom portion of the hat. I cut off the bottom portion of the cup to create the base for the hat. So as you can see, it's very wonky right now, but that's okay. We can even it out and just kind of trim around it to get the right size and shape. I've done this actually a couple of times on my channel where I've used the bottom of a cup to make a hat for a pair of Mickey ears. I've done it with like cardboard type party cups and then these plasticky ones as well. Either one works totally fine. So I would see if you have something on hand and save yourself a little bit of money. Right now I'm just trimming it to make it like a more even size and shape. And then I'm going to be taking this brown felt to cover the hat. So first I'm going to do a really wide tracing of the bottom of the cup. This is going to be the top portion of the hat. So I traced around it, but I definitely traced it wider than the actual perimeter of the cup because you're going to need a little bit of an edge on your fabric to make the gluing a much easier process. So I'm going to start by gluing down the top of the brown felt first and just sticking that cup down onto the felt, making sure that the marker that I traced is the side that I'm going to fold over, because obviously you don't want to see Sharpie marker on your hat. But I'm just going to work on the edges a little bit of glue at a time. You definitely don't want to do too much glue because you'll have to work so quickly. You'll probably end up making like wrinkles in the fabric that you don't want. So just do a little bit of hot glue and then just gently smooth the felt over the edge of the cup as you're working. And then this is what it should look like once you've gone all the way around. Make sure you clean up your hot glue between each of these steps because it is a little bit harder if you try to do that all at the end. So next we're going to cut a strip of felt that is long enough to fit around the cup. So I just kind of rolled the cup across it to measure, and then I'm cutting this bigger than I need it to be. So again, just giving myself a little bit of excess felt to work with. And then I'm going to glue this on the sides of the hat. So I'm going to start with just a line of hot glue that I'm going to tap down onto the felt and allow that to dry a little bit before I move on. Then I'm going to roll the fabric around, doing a line of hot glue as I push the little hat down onto the felt. And then I'll do a little bit more hot glue. This time I tried the glue on the felt to see if that gave me any better control, and I'm not really sure that there was a difference. I definitely would just do what you think is going to be the easiest for you. And then once I got to the end, obviously I glued down what was left. If you have any excess fabric, you can trim that off before you glue it down. But just be careful because hot glue and felt, unfortunately, can get very messy if you use too much, or if you it gets stuck to your finger and you drag it across the felt. It's very hard to clean off of the felt. So next we're going to work on closing up this bottom. So I am just starting by tacking down that first flap with a dot of hot glue, and then I'm doing a line of hot glue and then folding the fabric down into the cup. You can also cut slits to fold it over like a flap at a time, if that makes sense. But we're going to be covering this hat in one more layer of felt, so I wasn't really worried on if I had any teeny tiny little imperfections. So now we're going to do that same step again, but this is going to be like the folded edge on Fozzie Bear's hat. So again, cut a strip of fabric that is the length of the hat. And then you're going to be gluing this onto the hat to give it a little bit of an edge, a lip. I don't know what to call this. I'm not a hat maker, guys. I'm only a Mickey ear hat maker. So I'm going to be doing kind of the same steps where I'm gluing it all the way around, and then I'll fold over the bottom and glue the bottom in as well. But I will take my time just a little bit more because this is the final layer of felt, so I don't want to have any messy glue or anything. Now you don't want this extra layer to be so tight to the hat that it just kind of blends in. You do want to leave a little bit of a gap. So if you can see here, I glued at the beginning and I glued at the end, and I didn't glue any of this yet. I have it loose and hanging there because I want to make sure that the lip of my fabric sticks out from the hat. Gosh, I hope I'm making sense. And then I'm going to go in and glue the bottom, and that's what's going to secure this final layer and make sure that it stays in place, but allow it to look more like a little hat and less like a pile of felt. As always, if you guys have any questions, I am happy to answer them in the comments below. When you guys are working on this final layer, this is a good time, like if you're struggling to like get wrinkles out of the fabric or anything, if you just do a little snip in the felt and just fold it over one flap at a time, it should be a little bit easier to work with. Now, if you guys look right now, like the inside of the hat is not pretty. It's not cute, but that part's not going to show. We're not going to see that. So it's okay. Trust the process. It's going to be all right. And then once you're to this stage, your little hat is done. You can take a lint roller to kind of clean off the hot glue strands. I definitely think this was a tad bit messier than I wanted it to be. But I had never done it before. And this was me just imagining how to make a hat out of the bottom of a cup and some felt. So I think it came out pretty cute. So right now what I'm doing is tugging on the felt and just kind of stretching it a little bit. It's just the tiniest little bit of effort, but look, it's a little tiny Fozzy Bear hat. The final thing that we're going to be making for this Fozzy Bear set of ears is a little pie. So I have these jars from Dollar Tree that have caps, and it was the right size of what I needed, so I just cut off the little edge of the lid, and then I'm going to be painting this using my elephant gray chalk paint to make it look like the pan of a pie. I did have to give this 2 coats because this plastic did not want to get painted, but it did work out. I do wish that I had a metallic silver to go over this gray paint with, so if you guys have that on hand, I definitely think it would look a tad bit more pie-like. Another option would be to use like the cap of a water bottle maybe, or something like that, but just find something in your house that's like kind of trash that you can reuse. And then to make the actual like whipped cream looking pie, we're going to be using some lightweight spackle. They do sell this at Dollar Tree. You can also get it at Walmart or any like Home Depot type store, but you're going to put it into either a piping bag or a Ziploc bag and then just snip off the tiniest bit of the corner, and then you're just going to squeeze out the, what's this stuff called? Lightweight spackle into the little tiny pie pan that you made. Make sure that the hole is small because obviously you're working with like such a small little pie pan that you don't want to like have it all explode out and be difficult. So I prefer to use piping bags, but obviously not everybody has these on hand, so a Ziploc bag will also work. And then I made it, but it looked a little bit too whipped cream like, and I wanted it to look more like those whipped cream pies. So I kind of mashed it down with my finger a little bit, and then I took this poking tool, which also, I don't know, so many things would probably work for this, but I took a poking tool that I have and I'm just poking the pie to add some texture to it. I don't know that this added like a huge difference, but to me it was necessary. So I'm going to show you what it looks like up close after I finish, but I just wanted to give it a little bit more texture. Boom, whipped cream pie. And now we're going to assemble the ears. This is the final step. So using my ear spacing template, again, I have this linked down below for you guys. I'm going to start with the hat because I know that the hat will be centered, and so then I can work with the ears a little bit easier. The good thing about this hat is that it is able to be squished a little bit, so I hot glued that down first, and then the ears are just going to go right next to the hat. And if you need to kind of push them in toward the hat a little bit, you'll be able to do that. But I'm just adding hot glue to the bottom of the ear, and then I'm firmly pressing it down onto the headband. Hold it there for at least 30 seconds and really allow that glue to fully set and dry, because if you don't, then your ear's not going to get adhered to the headband very strongly, and you want to make sure that it's nice and strongly held to the headband. Then we're going to do the same thing with the other ear on the other side. Just a line of hot glue and then firmly hold that down onto the headband. It's hard to get the amount of glue right if you've never done this before, but I would just look at the base of your ear and make sure that you're doing enough to where it will hold, but not so much that it's going to ooze out everywhere when you're working. So for this pie, I wanted to give it a little bit of a 3D element. And so I took some jewelry wire that I had on hand and I formed it into a spring. And then I'm going to be gluing my little pie onto this spring and then gluing the spring onto the headband. So I did flatten out the bottom of the spring so that I had something to glue down, and I just kind of played around with it until I liked how it looked. But I will just be using hot glue for this, so I put hot glue on the top of the spring and attached it to my little pie. By the way, this lightweight spackle, you should let this dry for 24 hours before working with it, otherwise you might smush your pie. So make sure you let that sit overnight before continuing on. And then for the spring, I'm just going to add some hot glue to the bottom of the spring and attach that to my headband. The good news about this too is that if you got a little bit of hot glue on the front of the ear, the spring will cover it up. So win-win. And then once that step is done, your Fozzy Bear inspired ears are all complete. I think these turned out really cute and they would be so much fun to wear to Muppets 3D. And the next part of the tutorial is going to be focused on the Waldo inspired Mickey ears. So I already had these little gold butterflies on hand. I do think that you could find something similar to this at Dollar Tree. I got mine off of Amazon. They weren't expensive and you get like 200. But I'm going to be using some red puffy paint to add a design to these so that it looks a little bit more like the tail that Waldo has, because it's very butterfly-esque. So just using some puffy paint, I'm going in and adding in little dashes to create a similar design. And then I'm going to let this dry overnight. The puffy paint didn't get super thick or anything, but I do like the texture that it added. I do end up cutting off the little antenna on the butterfly, as well as those little pieces that stick out from the bottom of the wing to give it a more similar shape to what Waldo's tail looks like. But moving on to fabric, I'm going to be using this royal blue colored satin fabric, and I'm going to be using that ear cutting line template once again to cut out 4 of these. Now the only difference is that this type of fabric has no pull and no stretch, so definitely overcut this a little bit. Instead of tracing the template exactly as is and then cutting on the line, overcut whatever you traced. I'm not even tracing it, I'm actually cutting around the template itself because this fabric needs a little bit of extra. And then we're going to move on to cutting out some felt. So definitely in a coordinated color. I didn't have any blue on hand, but I did have this dark purple. I'm going to be using that same template to cut out 4 of these of felt as well. And this is just so that it looks a lot nicer and you can't tell that the ears are made of cardboard. So you're going to cut out 4 of those. And then we will move on to the cardboard step that we did with the Fozzy Bear ears. So just in case you skipped over the Fozzy Bear one and moved ahead to this one, you're going to be using the foam and batting template. I have all of my templates linked down below for you guys for personal use, and you will trace 4 of these. You're only going to see me trace 3, but you do need 4, and cut those out either using scissors or an X-Acto knife and a cutting mat. So at this point you should have 12 ears cut out. You should have 4 blue fabric, 4 purple felt or whatever color felt, and 4 cardboard. And we're going to start with the felt and the cardboard. So I'm going to be hot gluing in lines at the top first and then working my way down the sides and folding over the felt and tapping it down into the hot glue. You want to make sure that you do pull your fabric tight, but don't bend your cardboard. You don't want to compromise the structure of the ear. And then you can just leave the bottom open until you get to the fabric portion, because we can just close the felt and the fabric at the same time. So after doing the felt layer, you're going to do the exact same thing with your fabric. Just do a thin line of hot glue and then pull your fabric over and tap it down into the hot glue. You guys are going to see this fabric again, like it has no stretch and no give. So make sure that you really did cut yourself just a little bit of extra, because you will save your fingers from getting burned with glue. But just fold over your edges and tap that down and save the bottom of the ear for last. If this is your first time doing a set of ears, also I would highly advise working in really small sections when you're hot gluing, because you'll give yourself a little bit more time and you won't feel rushed while you're making them. Then go ahead and fold up the bottom portion. I do like to snip the fabric at the bottom in half so that I can fold it over one flap at a time. I find that that helps the bottom of my ear look a lot nicer. And then you're going to repeat those steps 3 more times so that you have 4 halves of ears. So this next portion I'm going to be decorating to look like the design on Waldo's back, using red puffy paint again. So I just pulled up a reference photo. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm using pink puffy paint, so sorry. So using hot pink puffy paint, I'm going to be creating a similar design as to what is on Waldo's back, and it's honestly so easy. It's like these little thin, almost like bean-like shapes, and they're random and they just kind of cascade down. This was super, super easy to do and did not take me long to complete at all. I also had this sit overnight to dry because I wanted to make sure that the puffy paint was like fully dry before moving on. But once it is dry, then you can go on to attaching the 2 halves together. So apply a pretty good amount of hot glue to the ear, and then you're going to firmly press down the other half on top and allow that glue to fully set and dry. And then we're going to be adding this red pom-pom trim into the crevice because, as you can see, without it, it looks not pretty. So you definitely need some sort of trim. I liked the whimsicalness of this pom-pom trim, and it fills in that little crack perfectly. So I'm just going to be adding a thin line of hot glue into the crack of the ear and then tapping my trim down into the hot glue. And again, this is a time where if this is your first time doing it, maybe don't work in as big of sections as you see me doing, just because I've made like hundreds of ears at this point. So I definitely, I don't know, I feel like I'm overly confident sometimes. But that is the completion of one whole ear, and then you're going to do the exact same thing on the other side, but we'll be adding the butterfly to it in just a little bit. So next I'm going to be making his hat. So I had this ruler on hand. It's about a 1-inch width ruler, but it's all in metric units. And honestly, I'm not even using the metric units. I'm just tracing the width of the ruler. So I just went down this piece of red craft foam and I just traced the width of the ruler, and I'm going to be cutting out 4 of these strips. So 3 of these will be bands on his hat. Like if you guys remember the photo, it's like the layers of his hat are detached and floating. So we're going to try to create that same type of illusion using craft foam. So I did cut 4 of these strips, and then they start big at the top of the hat and then they size down. So almost like an upside down cone. So I am going to use glue dots just to secure these in place because it was a little bit easier and less messy than hot glue, and they do work really, really well. So I started with just a glue dot and just created my first ring of his hat, and then I'm going to be creating the following rings, but I wanted to make sure that I had the sizing right, so I'm just kind of comparing it to the first one as I go. So the first one I made is actually the bottom ring, and then I'm going to work my way upward, making them just a little bit bigger each time I make one, and just using a single glue dot just to secure it while I'm working. And then once you have your 3 rings, we're going to move on to attaching them together. So I did try this and I messed up, so I'm moving on to doing it correctly. So using glue dots only, again, I cut a really thin piece of craft foam and I'm just attaching a glue dot to it and then doing the next layer of the hat. You want to make sure that the connecting strip is at the back where the seams of the hat are, so that all the kind of like not as pretty stuff is at the back. So again, just using a glue dot, I'm going to attach it to that center piece first, and then I'm going to add that final ring and just firmly press it down onto it. And then I'll obviously cut off the excess at the top. And now we have to make the base of the hat. So we have the little floating pieces, and now we need the little base. So I am going to trim the bottom circle on the last strip of craft foam that we cut out. And then I'm going to cut this out. So once you have the 3 rings, then you're going to need to create a base for the hat. So I am just putting it down onto this piece of craft foam, and I'm going to over trace on the bottom. So I'm putting it down and then tracing a little bit wider than the actual base of what we have so far. And then I'm going to go ahead and cut that out. To attach it, I'm going to add a little bit of hot glue, like so thin, to the bottom of the rings, and then I'm going to firmly press that down onto this little flat piece. You don't need much hot glue. Like, hot glue holds really, really well on craft foam, but I was pretty proud of this at this point. It has this nice little floating, whimsical quality to it, and I think it's really fun. I did decide to add a top to the hat. To do that, I just cut out a piece of craft foam and just trimmed it down until it was the right size, and I'm only gluing it to the back portion of the top of the hat. So I'm not gluing it all the way around because I wanted this piece to look like it was floating as well. So you just needed a little bit of hot glue at the very back of the hat, and then the hat is all done. So next we're going to be attaching everything together. So we've got our 2 ears, and we're going to be gluing those straight onto the headband. Using the ear spacing template again. So I did decide to attach the hat last this time. I don't really have a reason for it, I just did. And first I'm going to be gluing down this first ear using that ear spacing template. If this is your first time making ears, I would definitely suggest using a marker, maybe a silver Sharpie, to mark on the headband where the ear needs to go using the spacing template, and then glue the ear down. It'll just be a nice, helpful thing for you to have a nice marker on the headband. And then I'm going to attach the second ear as well, just firmly holding down that ear onto the headband and really allowing that glue to fully set and dry. Next, I'm going to be attaching the hat. This is super simple. Just add some glue to the very center of the hat and then hold this down. Oh, I actually added a glue dot onto the headband as well because I thought that it would help reinforce adding this to the center. Because it was a little bit tricky to firmly press the hat down onto the headband without like hurting it, if that makes sense. Next, we're going to be adding on that butterfly. This is the last step in making these ears, and I did decide to trim off the antenna and the little portions that stick out from the bottom of the wing as well. So I'm just going to be gluing that onto the center of the plain side of the ears. And now they're not plain anymore. That is it for these Waldo inspired Mickey ears. He's definitely like an odd character. You guys are gonna have to let me know if you like him, because I don't know, like, people don't like Figment because they think he's annoying. I can't imagine a ton of people liking Waldo. But you guys are gonna have to let me know. If you did make it all the way through to the end of this video, then please leave me a pie emoji so that I know you stuck with me to the very end, and I will see you in my next video. Bye guys.